Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're coming in from us. My name is Dave Blake, founder and CEO of ClientSuccess, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our ClientSuccess webinar today. I'm excited today to welcome my good long-term friend, Boaz Maor, who is our guest presenter today, talking about a subject that I love, and I know it's a controversial topic, but today we're talking about NPS, the metric that everyone loves to hate. How you doing, Boaz?
I'm quite well, thank you very much.
Great, welcome. And you're coming in from the Bay Area, right? Correct?
I am in California,
Yeah.
where the sun is shining after a few days of rain, so it's nice.
Well, that's great. Well, for those, I know many on the call will know Boaz, but for those who don't, Boaz is a long-term thought leader in the customer success space. He's one of the OGs. He's got amazing experience across so many years, decades of experience, and brings together all of that experience and that passion and that best practice to us today. So welcome, Boaz.
Thank you. As an anecdote, do you remember, Dave, the first time you and I met?
I don't know that I do.
You did a focus group. This is before you raised your seed round,
That's
um,
right.
somewhere in San Francisco. And one of your potential investors, that was an investor in a company I worked at the time, made a connection between us, and we
Yeah,
sat and talked. And I was like, yep, there is a room for a customer success platform to help us do our jobs.
that
And
is
here we
great.
are,
Thanks
what,
for
10
reminding
years
me about
later,
it.
12 years later?
I remember that now, and thanks for the reminder. That it was meant to be, and I'm so grateful that we made that connection so many years ago. And lately, you've been talking a lot about NPS. How come, like, why NPS or why now?
Well, like you said, it's one of the most controversial topics. People love to hate it. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think when you look throughout customer success forums, conferences, presentations, next to the question who should own the commercial relations, it's probably one of the most discussed topics, because I think people don't really dive deep to understand it. They think about it like any other survey and sometimes confuse the way it's used. So I spent I've used NPS in many companies in my past. I use it intensively in the last 5 years, where I worked in a company that was focused on small businesses. And when you work with small businesses, you have many more customers that you touch much less frequently. So
Yeah,
you need to find ways to engage in a one-to-many, many-to-many ways. And surveys is a good mechanism for that, as opposed to talking individually to individual customers. 82% of my customers in this last company paid us less than $1,000 a year in SaaS fees. There were some transaction fees and stuff. So you can't really invest a lot in dealing one-on-one. And we looked at many ways to get more data, right? Understanding the customers, really build the voice of customers. And when we were thinking about Net Promoter Score versus other metrics, CSAT, CES, whatever, I found that there's a lot of misconceptions out there, a lot of bastardizing of this, metric that was created 30 years ago, but kind of lost its way a little bit in some places. So Sarah Buccino, that worked in my team and led the customer success management team, and I spent a lot of time building what I really believe is a best-in-class solution that I'd love to share with people. And if it adds to people's ability to execute well, then fantastic.
that's great. Well, you're in good company today with me because I'm a believer of NPS. It has its place in SaaS, and I think we align on a lot of the concepts you're going to share today. So let's jump into it
Cool.
and let's hear it. Again, if any of you have any questions as we go, drop them in the Q&A, or if you have any comments to drop into the chat. Remember to pick everybody so everybody can see it, unless you want to direct your chat directly to me and Boaz. So
Cool. Do you see the slides?
yes.
All right. So NPS, the metric that everybody loves to hate. In a recent survey that Sarah Buccino and I ran, we got almost 150 respondents. 82% of people said they use NPS with their customers in their companies today. However, only 34% suggested that their CEO is either seeing it as valuable or very valuable. Clearly, there's a disconnect here, right? A lot of people do it, but not so many people see it as valuable, which raises the question, is NPS dead, right? Is it a vanity metric, like some people say, or is it really a metric that helps you understand your customers? And like we just talked about, we spend a lot of time thinking through it. And I actually believe that the problem is not NPS on its own, but the way it's implemented. And therefore, we spend a lot of time thinking and developing and running an NPS program that we saw being very, very successful, very working. And I'd love to share it with everybody. So here are my objectives for this session. One, I want to make sure that we all align on NPS fundamentals. What is it? What is it not? What's good about it? What are the drawbacks? There are drawbacks. Second, based on that, I'll suggest to you the NPS methodology that we developed and why I think it's really, really good and strong and effective. And then I want to build on that methodology and really share a set of practical, actionable tasks you can take, building a program out of it. If it's just an NPS methodology, then it's a single data point. But if you build a good program, it can be very effective in part of your CS plans. So need to give shout out to Sarah Buccino. She and I worked a lot on this program, thought about it together, but she's the one who executed most of the work. So I want to give credit. And if anybody wants to ping her, she's fantastic.
Sarah's
all right,
great.
so let's understand a little bit. The mindset I have towards NPS, by the way, consistent with a lot of other things in the world in general, is there are very few things that are all good or all bad, right? There are some good things, there are some not so good things, and there are some things that we just need to figure out how to work. What's good about NPS? The main two things, right, that are the pros for NPS is one, simplicity. It's a single question. And when you ask customers a single question, you should get a very high response rate. Customers don't like surveys, they don't like lengthy surveys, but are very willing to do a one-click feedback form. By the way, we spend a lot of energy convincing, talking to our people internally and then to our customers that it's not a survey, it's a one-click feedback form. The second benefit of NPS is it has a very rigid wording of the question and a very rigid scale of answers. And that together that rigidity provide high ability to benchmark. Benchmark against yourself, different products, different type of customers, different geographies, whatever, and also benchmark you versus other companies, competitors or not. That's very, very powerful. At the same time, we have to acknowledge some of the drawbacks of NPS. One is there is a weak correlation between NPS and retention. And if you have a metric that doesn't really represent well what you're trying to achieve, you need to acknowledge the challenges. By the way, there is also weak correlation between any of the other metrics, CSAT, first call resolution, CES, etc., and retention. Which I think the insight here is that a single metric has very little impact correlation on overall customer buying decisions, right? It's a single metric, but I think we need to acknowledge it. The second one is more interesting and what we spend more time looking into, and that's the fact that limited feedback, one data point from a customer, a number, a 6, a 2, a 10, is hard to make actionable. And that's where a lot of people talk to me when I talk to them about why do you like or not like NPS, and I say, hey, it's not actionable. I get one data point. What can I do with it? Keep that in mind as we continue to talk through. There are some ugly things when you talk to customers. First, response rates out there are fairly low. In this survey that I just talked about, we did in December of last year and January of this year, 150 almost respondents. Most, one of every 5 people, 20% of the respondents, didn't know what the response rate is, which is a good indication they don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. And about half suggested the response rate was lower than 10%, which is consistent with what we see in surveys out there. Most survey responses are low single digit response rates. And if you don't have a high response rate, then A, you don't represent well the reality, and it's hard to see what your survey and how your survey correlates to what happens out there. Second, if you don't have a lot of responses, you don't have a lot of data to run analysis. So what's the point? Second, we saw a lot of inconsistency in usage. People put NPS as part of other surveys. They change their wording, right, etc. And if you don't use it in the way it was intended and in a very consistent way, garbage in, garbage out, right? You don't really get the right response. And last thing, a lot of people treat it as a single data point as opposed to a program, right? You need a voice of customer program. You want to understand your customers. NPS is one facet, one mechanism, and you need to act on it. You need to use it as opposed to just put a number out there. So a lot of problems that people encounter, which again came to the foundation of what we were trying to do. Before we move into what to do, here's a good cheat sheet for you. Dave, as a side note, I really hope your company, I know you use NPS, don't have any of those items in here, but I'd love to see maybe in the chat if people can comment on any of those. If you have them in your company, you're probably not optimizing your use of NPS. So
We're
7 best ways to kill your NPS program. 1, embed NPS question inside a lengthy customer survey. The whole point of NPS is it's a single question. So if you have a lengthy questionnaire, 20 questions, 15 questions, whatever, and NPS is one of them, there's no point to the NPS. It's just one other thing. 2, change the question. I hear a lot of feedback from people who say, hey, maybe the question, based on your experience with us to date, would you recommend us to a colleague or a friend? I don't like that question. I want it changed. I want to ask it in reverse. Would you not like, or what would happen if we stopped using you and whatever? All of these other mechanisms are good if you want to run a survey. But the moment you change it, it's not NPS anymore. You cannot benchmark against other NPS and you lose that dimension. Just be aware of it. 3, there is nothing better in demotivating your customers to continue and respond to your survey than ignore them. A customer give you feedback, even if it's one click, the minimum you should do is respond to them and thank them. By the way, you should thank them in as elaborate and as contextual way as possible. We'll talk about it in a minute. Focus on the NPS score is a good way to kill it. NPS is just a number. At the end of the day, whether it's 23, 36, -5, it's just a number. If you don't look at the trend, if you don't look at differences among different customers, etc., the number in and on itself is kind of a vanity number, not really valuable. Number 5 is probably my favorite. We all want a good NPS if we believe it's a representation of our customer sentiment. And if you motivate your people based on NPS score, you probably will get some of them, many of them, maybe even all of them, trying to get a better service to your customer. But what also might happen is they will start to reduce the number of negative NPS scores you get from customers. They may not ask all customers to give you feedback. And the result might be a biased program that is partial and not comprehensive. So be aware of that. Number 6, if you only share aggregate level NPS score, here's my number, it's 36 or whatever the number is. People nod their hands and say, okay, well, we have a number. If you give more dimensions and talk about trends and things, actions related to NPS changes, then I think it's much more meaningful. And the last thing, if you treat NPS as your predictor of health and retention of an individual customer, customers are complex, right? And if you're trying to get from that single data point a number from a customer, a predictor for the customer health or retention, you're likely bastardizing this and not using NPS appropriately.
Hey, Boaz, I will say, I will respond. We are currently doing our NPS survey, and I'm glad to say we have not made any of these mistakes. So
Excellent.
I was nervous when you started going on this slide, but I can say that we're not making these mistakes. So thanks for the suggestion.
Christy is pinging me in the background like, that's okay, we're good. All right.
Exactly.
So let's go into how to think. The next 3 slides or 2 slides are kind of how to think about NPS and really move into what would be a good methodology. So the next are 6 themes, right? How to think. 1, trend over score. Or as Brandon Sanderson say in his fantastic book, The Way of Kings, journey over destination. The score itself is kind of a vanity. It's a number. It's a metric. The trend gives you insight, especially if you can correlate actions you take to changes over time. 2, response rate is king. Most people, like I said before, have very low response rates. And if you have a low response rate, A, you don't have good representation of what reality is, and your survey is not good predictor to anything. B, you don't have enough data to run analysis, right? If you want to have multiple dimensions, you have to have a lot of data points. So really focus a lot on getting high response rates. As an example, for example, we motivated people, right? We shouted people, we praised people for having high response rate among their customers, and we compare teams to one another on response rate, not on NPS score. The score is the score. The best teams got 80%, 90% response rate, and that was fantastic for us. 3, comments are gold. There are 2 things about comments. 1, they give you another perspective beyond the number 7. What does that 7 mean? Why did you give me that number, Mr. Customer? Comments add some more wording and more perspective. But also, if you invest in quantify the qualitative data from the comments, you get another dimension of data. By the way, all the charts that we're using here are coming from actual data we had in our work, but we mask them in different ways. So, for example, the comments, the chart about comments in the bottom is partial data from one segment of customers. So, we protect the integrity and the privacy of data, so you can't really make any sense of it for the company we used to work at. But it gives you a sense, this is real data, right? We segment it and then took a snapshot. And you can see, for example, we took all the comments, created a mechanism, a structure for how to quantify them into groups. And then on the left-hand side are the comments grouped into categories of the detractors in red. And on the right-hand side, the comments grouped into categories for the promoters. And you can see that some interesting insights come to bear. For example, the top item is ease of use. So it's both the main reason for people to say they love us. It's also the main reason for people to say they don't. When you get it to the next level and you start to compare different types of customers, different level of service, different product, you get a tremendous level of insight over why this is the issue. And that insight enables us to be very practical, actionable in what we do with the data. Timing uncovers insight. I know that most people have a certain notion of we ping our customers on some regular basis every quarter or every year. We took it one step further and we said, we want to touch customers at the completion of onboarding. Then we want 90 days later and then annually. And plotting that over time, again, we're using the exact same question, the exact same mechanism, the exact same scale, now give us insight. There are differences among those feedback forms from customers, and we can learn from that. What has changed from after go live to 90 days later? Can we learn from that? Can we pinpoint problems? Also, we looked at, should we, because we use in-app to deliver the feedback forms, should we do it before or after a task is completed? Should we do it on these pages versus those pages? We spend a lot of time tweaking and optimizing, but again, timing is critical to getting the right feedback from the customer. Metadata gives depth. We spend a tremendous amount of energy. I think probably the most amount of energy we spent was with our BI team to bring into our data mart a lot of metadata about customers, so we can turn this one data point from customers, the NPS score, into a very, very expensive analysis. We brought customer data, their industry, their geography, their size, the duration they've been a customer. We brought persona. Who are the people? What are their roles? The time they've been to in the company, level of engagement. We looked at which product they use. That was really, really impactful. That product versus another product, level of usage, high versus low, location in the application, etc. And obviously different level of services. Customers who use our onboarding versus DIY, customers who use support a lot or not, had a TAM or not, etc. And then lastly, kind of when you think about building NPS as a program, it really needs to be a programmatic approach. We call it CARE, collect customer feedback, analyze data to distill insights, react with actions internally and externally. We'll talk about it in a minute. And obviously enhance the program over time. This thing took us a good 2 years to get to the point where we were like, okay, this works really well, because you build pieces, right? You can't build everything at once. So we launched it, we analyzed it, we improved, we had a roadmap of how to improve over time, and that proved to be very, very powerful.
Hey, Boaz, we have a few questions back on that slide, if you don't mind. First one was looking at the box number 1, trend equals insights, and we had somebody ask a little bit more detail. What do you mean by that? What the score is vanity, but the trend is important. Do you want to give a little bit more context to that, and then I've got a few more questions as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if I went too quickly on it, if you told me that your score is 23, I know not. I can. It doesn't add anything to me. Right? I can't tell you whether it's good or bad. Right? I can't tell you what to do. But if you told me that that your score is 23, but it used to be 15 last quarter and 12 the quarter before, then I have a sense of something that you do. And by the way, if you add actions you have taken, you change your pricing scheme, you launched a new product, NPS is going down a little bit because it's not as mature as your previous product. You change the methodology for your onboarding. Now things are changing. Maybe they're better, maybe they're worse. If you talk to me about changes, actions you take, and then you show me how NPS changed over time, we can isolate and glean insight into what impact the actions had on your customers. And from that, you can make decisions on what else to do or not to do, what to change or not to change. We rolled back products based on some of the feedback. We focused attention on certain products or certain service levels that we needed to do because we looked at the trend and say, hey, something is broken here as opposed to over there, let's fix it. We looked, for example, and we saw that feedback from certain industries was different than other industries that help us pinpoint what happened. And when we looked over time, we made changes to specific products that impact one industry versus another. We saw that in one industry, there was no change in NPS. In the other, it was. It validated the impact of our actions in the product on the sentiment of customers. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure. And then that's a really good point, is like, I need to understand where we're going and if we're improving overall versus any given score for any given individual or campaign. The other question was the response at number 2, the 23%, and the question was, is that a guideline, or what is a good response rate that you've seen? Do you have any insights? I know it's very different between companies and products and customers. Any thoughts of what is a good response rate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can say the following. One, research out there suggests that most surveys get low single-digit response rates,
right.
2, 3, 4%. I think that when I think about my customer base, if you get less than 10%, I think your survey is not very valuable. If you get over 20%, it starts to be very valuable.
Yes.
How to get there is a question, because when you think about a percent, it's a numerator over a denominator, and you can change both, right? For example, you can ask more times, but then you can put in a denominator if you want only the number of customers, even though you pull them 5, 6, 7 times. So you are maybe increasing your numerator, but artificially you keep the denominator low because you only count the number of customers. But if you count all the times you pinged your customers, then maybe your response rate is lower. I think people should be careful not to inadvertently, change what you are aiming for. I also think there's a difference between small customers and large customers, right? We operated the last 5 years, Sarah and I, in a very, very light touch customers, right? 80%, 82% of our customers paid us less than $1,000 a year in SaaS fees. There were other fees, transactions fees, etc. But there's only so much you can do with a customer that pays you so little, right? Those 82% of customers mostly were less than 10 employees in a small coffee shops or restaurant or a clinic of some kind. So we pinged very few individuals. However, if you work with an enterprise customer that is very large, you may want to attack multiple personas and try to get many data points from an individual customer, which would give you then the ability to contrast and get insights on different teams, right? Imagine if you can get data and show differences across all of your customer base between the technical contacts you have versus the business contacts. The person who operates the laptop or whatever interacts with you on a daily basis versus an executive, right? People in finance versus people in marketing. If you get in a large company multiple data points, there's another layer of analysis you can do. And again, your response rate is now relative to how many of those data points you got. I don't have a good benchmark for what a good one is. I can tell you that relatively low portion of people are getting over 20%. Very few people get over 20%.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to put that as a good benchmark, can I get more than 1 of every 4, 1 of every 5 of my customers to respond? That seems to be a good benchmark of it's achievable and it's good representation, and you will probably get enough data to run a good analysis.
Yeah, I agree. I think from my experience, somewhere in the teens is usually a good response. I for some reason 14% is in my mind, but certainly 10 to 20% is good. Above 20% is excellent. Do you think that from your experience, there's a question of, does in-app surveys, do they have better response than email surveys? Do you have any insights into that?
Oh, absolutely. No question. No question. In-app is better. Think about it this way. When you, as the vendor, send an email to a customer, you send it when it's good for you to send. When you think it's good and it arrives to the customer somewhere, sometime, they're all in different time zones and places. So it's not necessarily in a good time for them. It's an interruption to their work, right? They need to stop what they do and go to email to see it. And you don't know what's their mindset is and whether they care about this versus 50 other emails they have in their inbox. But when they are working with your solution, they are in the mindset, they're running some action, they're looking at the report, their mind is attached to you, higher chances that they will respond. It's contextual to them. They're already thinking about you. Might as well feel, again, if it's a one-click, feedback form. If it's a lengthy survey, that's something else because you're, again, interrupting them. The way we thought about it when Sarah and I put this together is we thought about Uber or Lyft. You finish a ride, and the first thing that comes on your screen is, can you please give us a one-click feedback? And by the way, you can't do anything else on the app until you give that feedback, so you're more likely to do it. But you're in the mindset. You just finished the ride. Might as well give feedback very quickly. One click, you're done. If I got it as an email, who cares? I wouldn't touch it probably. So yes, in-app is dramatically better response rate.
There you go.
Cool. Let's keep on going.
Yep.
So here is the one-page, simple, but really, I believe, a best-in-class NPS methodology. Here's how it goes. One question. Use the standard language single NPS question. Refer to it as a feedback form. It's one click to get the data. Based on your experience to date, would you recommend us to a colleague or a friend? we very strongly suggest to add an optional text box, but bring it up after you collect the NPS feedback, the number. Why? SurveyMonkey was a customer of mine some years back, and I learned from them, nobody knows survey is better than SurveyMonkey, I think. What I learned from them is that every question you add to a survey reduces your response rate in half. So I don't want to show customers two question surveys. I want to show them one and then add an optional next one. But I capture the feedback from the first one. So if they don't give me comments, that's fine. If they give me, that's extra. By the way, we got about 20% of the people who submitted our feedback form to also add comments. So pretty good.
That's great.
The next thing is where I think this methodology became so unique and powerful. We didn't just ask customers on some regular cadence every 3 months or whatever. We asked them in 3 very specific points along their life cycle. Immediately after they go live, because going live, right, implementation is a massive investment normally, and it's very meaty for a customer. And it takes into account when you ask immediately after what they heard from sales and what was in reality from their implementation team. So we asked it at the completion of onboarding. Then we asked it 90 days later. Now the customer has more information about us. They worked with the solution for 90 days. We want to get that data. And then annually thereafter, right? So on the anniversary thereafter. And it was amazing to see the differences. And when we looked at the differences, we could isolate problems and challenges, right? A lot of people would tell us, what happened to me over the 90 days was different from what I expected when I went live, and we learned from that. And we could improve that, right? The way it was sold, the way it was implemented, the way it was communicated, etc. So these were the 3 times along the life cycle of the customer. By the way, in your businesses, it might not be 90 days, it might be 6 months, I don't know. But the notion of 3 points along the life cycle of a customer and then repeatedly annually is very powerful. We had a question before, we use in-app, we're very strong believers that it adds. Here is the number 5 here is really also an interesting insight that we found helpful. There's a lot of survey fatigue out there. Very few people like surveys, right? I don't know about you guys, I don't know about you, Dave. I get requests for feedback constantly from so many vendors in so many ways. And generally, my response is, I don't care, I have things to do. So explaining why I want feedback helped. And again, if you think about these 3 times, the first one was, congratulations, Mr. Customer, you went live. Based on your experience to date, would you recommend us, blah, blah, blah. 90 days later, congratulations, Mrs. Customer, you have now worked with our solution for 90 days. Based on your experience to date, da, 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 da. Anniversary, the same thing. That gave the customer a sense that it's not a random questionnaire arriving on their doorstep when it matters to us. It's really contextual to them. It's specific to them. And they liked it, right? They liked the personal notion of it, the sense that we understand them, we align to them. And all you need is, again, another notch to get slightly higher response rates. And then the last thing in the methodology like this, of course, is you have to act on the data. If you don't, customers will stop responding, your CEO will not pay attention to it, and it becomes, again, a vanity number. So let's talk about how to move NPS from a collection to a methodology. But any questions specific? I see a lot of pop-ups on questions.
There's a few questions that I'll ask. One is saying how quickly after. I love the idea of submitting or doing your campaigns right after a certain event in a life cycle. How quickly after it should you send the NPS? The question was, is there a moment where the potential recall bias may occur if we wait too long?
Yeah, that's right. So I think that the answer to that question really depends on you and the way your business is, right? Some solutions the customers start using immediately, and some solutions take a little bit of time, right? So you need to adjust. The point here is, whether you do it the day after the customer go live or a week after the customer go live, doesn't matter that much. If you do it a month later, it doesn't feel connected to that go live anymore. So it needs to be close enough. And don't worry, it's not like you eliminate the other feedback, right? You will get it 90 days later or 100 days later, whatever you want. But you want to isolate, hey, what happened in this period of time versus what happened in this period of time. If they're the same, that's good data for you. If they're different, that's good data for you, right? It needs to be close enough to those milestones. The 90-day point or the annual anniversary, I will do it on that day. There's no reason not to.
Yeah. We've got Jamie who's asking, what percentage of people actually fill out the comments after? And what is the percentage that you would consider good? How many add context and additional comments after they submit their NPS?
So we got consistently for 6 or 7 quarters, 22 to 25% response rate for the NPS feedback form.
Yeah.
And 20% of those also added comments very consistently.
Yeah. And that's what I would think from our experience as well. And again, I can't emphasize enough, as Boaz has, that's where the real gold of the NPS is. If your participants will leave any kind of context and feedback and in addition to their score, that's super helpful. Another question is, where do you take the data for sequencing delivery, or what methods, what tools do you use? Do you take the data from a CS platform, your CRM? How do you get the data to know who to deliver it to?
If you hold that question for 2 more slides, you'll have the answer in a slide format.
Yes, and then the other question Kevin is asking is, what is there a frequency where it becomes noise, I guess is what he's asking. Like a lot of people ask at the end of every support ticket that's closed. Do you recommend that kind of methodology, or do you feel like less is more in this situation?
So I think this gets into an adjacent question, which is NPS versus CSAT, which is a lot of what I hear. And one of the challenges Sarah and I had to deal with in the company we worked at before that used CSAT very frequently. I think CSAT and NPS are complementary. They're addressing a slightly different part of the customer experience. I think about CSAT as much more tactical, transactional, where we're able to solve your problem right now. So it's a very problem solution oriented. We asked it at the end of every support ticket. We got 8 to 9% response rate, but there are so many support tickets. It was a good representation and helped us there. But again, it helped us understand how well are we able to address support issues, right? Tactical issues. NPS is positioned as based on overall experience. What is your overall perspective of our company, not this particular interaction that you had with this particular agent on this particular topic. So I would use both. CSAT has its place. NPS had its place.
Yeah.
I would absolutely try very hard not to overburden customers with a lot of NPS questions because there will be survey fatigue. Again, my suggested methodology here is 3 times in year 1, probably 2 times in year 1 and then 1 every year after, right? So the completion of onboarding plus minus 90 days later and then annually thereafter.
There you go. I agree.
Cool. Let's move forward, and again, we can talk as much as people want. I have dinner plans, but I'm available until then. All right, acting on the data. We suggest 4 components here. 1, centralize the source of truth. 2, obviously, respond to customers. 3, empower internal stakeholders and teams. And 4, educate and inform executives. The second one, everybody does to some degree. The fourth one, if you have an NPS, you probably do in some degree. I don't think people spend enough emphasis on 1 and 3, which is where I think many people will get more insights, but we will go one at a time on each one of those, and I'd love people's feedback on what works, what doesn't work, what feels right or not. again, as a caveat, the data that we show here is A, real data, but B, partial and segmented, not partial, but segmented, so you can't really associate it to a specific product or a company, so it protects the privacy of where the data is coming from. Acting on the data, centralizing the source of truth. It was really important for us to create a single data location for the NPS data. The problem we're trying to solve there is a lot of teams are collecting sentiment from customers. Marketing has some, sales maybe have some, support may have some, CX may have some. And part of the problem is that you go into meetings and people have different perspectives because they're looking at different data. So we figured out, okay, if we can create a centralized source of truth and bring all of that data into one place, we can empower the organization as opposed to battle over whose data is more accurate. So we started by putting all of our NPS data in one place. Then we complemented it with a tremendous amount of metadata. Again, over time, month after month, we added more and more things. We obviously quantified the comments. This is the image you see on the bottom and we saw before. And then we did two things. One, we turned the data into insight by developing a lot of reports and dashboards that made it accessible to people, right? A lot of data is a problem. A dashboard or a report is a solution. Oh, here's a solution. Here's a data that adds some insight somewhere. But then we democratize it. So we enabled anybody and everybody who wanted access to this source of data. Obviously, people gravitate towards what's easy, so most people just went into the reports and dashboards we created, but some people wanted to do more analysis, and we let them. So we weren't at a place of we hoard the data or we control it. We enabled that access, and more, we learned from what people wanted to build additional reports and dashboards. So that was a very intentional effort to centralize the data, show a lot of correlations, right? Show how it's valuable, and then open it up to people.
I'll have to say, just throwing a plug for what we've done is we at ClientSuccess, we have native NPS capability, which allows you to not only submit it, but enrich it with the metadata, quantify those comments. And then we also post every comment to Slack so everybody has access to the responses to empower them to have the visibility and to be able to act. So that's what we do here at ClientSuccess.
That's excellent. Let's talk about that. How do we work with customers? Because I love your feedback on this one. So yeah. What we did is three things. Again, a lot of people act on it already. It's not where I think we added a tremendous amount of value, but we try to be very intentional and specific. One, obviously there were automated responses, right? Whenever a customer provided feedback, there was an automated response, but that response was unique to the feedback we got. Promoters, passives, detractors got a slightly different response, which indicated to the customer that we are listening, that we are sensitive. It's not a generic, oh, thank you for your feedback, and disappears into the ether. But also it prompted some actions in places where we thought there is value. For example, with promoters, we asked them to give us feedback on other places where feedback is provided, or do a case study with us if they are interested and we can work with them. With detractors, we offered the opportunity to meet with us and talk more and specifically address their issues. We also asked specifically for more information so we learn a little bit more. Separate from those automated responses, kind of similar to what you just talked about, Dave, we created a specific channel. We use Teams, but it's the same as Slack, right? And we created it a red hot channel. Yeah. Every once in a while, you have a customer who's really emotional and in a bad mode. We don't want to wait any more than hours before we respond. So we created a specific channel for those unique situations of something bad is brewing. We brought all the right people, representatives of support and implementation and marketing and product into that channel, and we made sure that we address things very, very quickly in those burning situations. And customers appreciated it a lot, and the team appreciated it a lot because, again, it wasn't a overload of a lot of data. It was only those that we thought were really problematic. The rest of the comments, we'll talk in a minute about, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, etc.
Yep.
And then the last thing that we've done on customers is we created specific training and education offerings to address some of the common themes that we hear from customers, such as 1-minute video to explain certain feature that we saw consistently people are struggling with, or pointers to the LMS, the learning management system, our academy, where people could get more data about, learning about what to do with our product, etc.
Yeah, maybe I'll share how we do it at ClientSuccess. The way that we do it is after a customer responds with their NPS score and/or comments, hopefully comments, we automatically we kick in 3 different paths. One is that from promoters, we kindly ask them if they would be willing to do a G2 review for us and receive a thank you gift card for that. For passives, we have our CCO, Christy Faucheruso, reach out automatically to all of our passives because there's some, we're not quite there. There's some things we could do better, and we encourage her to, she takes the lead on those. And I, as the CEO, has chosen to be the one to reach out to all detractors. So all detractors receive a note from me, an email from me, with a link to my calendar asking if they would be willing to have 15 minutes with me to share their feedback. And then we take action in other ways, micro actions accordingly. But I love that for us at ClientSuccess, that works. Not every company that would work. If you've got thousands and thousands of responses, obviously a CEO,
Exactly.
or you're with a major enterprise, it can't do that. But I love these conversations. I really like to understand the context behind the score, and that's how we do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It makes a lot of sense, right? How high touch versus low touch operate very differently.
Yep.
Here is item number 3, right? Empowering internal stakeholders. Quite often, and actually in the survey that Sarah and I did, we asked who owns the NPS in your company, and because the large majority, about 55% of the respondents were customer success people, the largest portion of companies reported that CS own NPS. Now, I don't think when people say own NPS, they mean own the metric. I think they own the program, right? The metric is a company level metric, right? It's overall sentiment toward the company, but someone need to administer, right? Send the feedback forms out, collect the data, analyze it, share it. And CS in most cases is that entity. By the way, that changes. The larger the company, the more the team that owns the administration, coordination of customer success, NPS, moves from customer success to either marketing, operations, or CX. Right, which makes sense. Large companies have more dedicated teams that look at those metrics, but in smaller ones, it's normally CS. The way we operated is we saw ourselves as the guardians, right, as the people who administer, but we don't own it. We want to be the ones to empower the different stakeholders with this data. So we did monthly and quarterly calls sharing our analysis. We collected feedback in those calls from the stakeholders. Hey, VP of product, what other analysis would be helpful for you? What other view on the data would you like to see, right? And that created a wonderful interaction, right? Collaboration, right? You see on the bottom, this is literally a screenshot, again, masked for a specific segment, but we compare different product to one another so we can have a really intense conversation with the heads of product over what happens here that doesn't happen over there. We did the same thing with the implementation team. Why are these customers having a different sentiment than those other customers? Let's dive into that. And in every one of those calls, we ask for more feedback. What else do you want to see? What additional metadata, what additional analysis, what different report, etc. And then we publish the action items, we publish the progress to those action items. The next time around, we showed here is what we have done, again, the progression of the program over time. And at any one of those points, we also said, please go in and do your own analysis, right? Try, bring us, don't just trust us and rely on us. Do things on your own, bring additional insight. And we got a tremendous amount of feedback from people who liked it.
That's great.
And then the last thing here is educate and inform executives. Again, NPS is a common metric that executives, especially CEOs, like, because they like to compare to other companies and see, based on that comparison, where they are and how good they work. So we embedded it in every one of our monthly operating reviews. We then used the data, which was, again, focused a lot about the comparison to, you can see on the bottom right, for example, right? We've done comparison to the main competitors of ours and where we are. We showed trends over time, right? We talked about what we do and how it influences. Specific conversations were almost every time about what does this mean, right? Those changes to the product roadmap. What should we do differently? Should we fix bugs or should we go after enhancement requests or any, right? So it filled a lot of company strategy conversations. We then took this data and with small tweaks, we added it into our company meetings. So the entire universe of the people working in the company could get a sense of, we are very customer focused. We really understand customers. We take actions that influence customers wherever possible. We showed how specific actions of engineering teams, product teams, customer success team, implementation teams influence customers, because people on the front line want to see that what they do matters. And this is one way to show this. And then in executive briefings, we added even additional dimensions of customers via customer briefings, for example, case studies that we brought in, or data, testimonials, etc., that add additional flavor to the data with customer information. So this is how we walked it all. Kind of in summary, we are kind of short on time, I guess. We very strongly believe that NPS, when deployed well, is very powerful. We think this best-in-class methodology that we shared should be, the cornerstone of how you work. Please act on the data if you have it, right? This CARE program, right? Collect, analyze, react, and enhance, and tweak it to your business needs, right? The duration, the specifics of how your metadata works, etc. By the way, on the right-hand side here, you can have links to the 3 blog posts that Sarah and I shared, and we'd love to hear your feedback on them. We plan to continually evolve this with the feedback we get from people, which is very valuable.
This is excellent. Thank you so much, Boaz, and I know Sarah is on as well. Excellent work here and great best practices and suggestions. I love the idea of like NPS has its place in SaaS and in businesses. With the right context, the right best practices, it can be super valuable. So thank you so much for sharing. Any last insights or anywhere else that our audience can find you, Boaz, or mainly focus on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the easiest way. Those who know me know that I respond to LinkedIn messages almost always. I find it interesting. I find it, the two-way collaboration, intriguing, empowering. If people want to connect to me and ask questions or give feedback even more, I'd love that.
Great. Thanks again for joining us, Boaz, and sharing your passion and your experience. And we're always welcome you back here any other time, Boaz. And thanks to all the audience. We appreciate you jumping in. I know it's a busy day, and we're grateful that you would join us each week. We try to have a webinar every Tuesday here at ClientSuccess. Next week, we have another great webinar. 2 of the best CCOs out there. Our very own Christy Faucherusso will be joined by Kate Peter, who is Chief Customer Officer at PayScale. They'll be talking about the first 90 days, lessons and advice from the first 90 days as a CCO. But I think a lot of the best practices they share and learnings that they're going to share will apply to any leader or manager within customer success. So join us next week. Watch for those emails to register for that webinar coming out in the next couple of days, as well as the posting of the full replay of this webinar with Boaz today. Thanks everybody for joining us. Please reach out to our team at Client Success if we can help you in any way or if you'd like a demo of our product. But between now and then, we hope you have a great week and we'll see you next week.